oneBURGH and the TroupCast are partnering with the Ryan Shazier Fund for Spinal Rehabilitation. The Run for the Black and Gold will take place on Friday evening, May 2nd at AccuSure Stadium in the PNC Champions Club. We will be on site that night at the event from AccuSure Stadium with the red carpet, player interviews, and more. Horse race and celebrity jockey auction will feature Ryan Shazier, Jerome Bettis, Mel Blunt, Pat Fryermuth, Arthur Moats, and more. For tickets and more information, make sure you visit www.ryanshazierfund.org/run25 and join us next week for a special edition of the TroupCast with a press conference like podcast with three of the celebrity jockeys next week right here on oneBURGH. And with that, we welcome you into the TroupCast for Wednesday, April 9th. I am your host, Ed Troup. Joining me into the podcast is our good friend Dave Finoli, who is an author of the book that just came out not too long ago entitled Behind the Mic, Pittsburgh's Greatest Sports Broadcast Journalist. Dave, good evening. Welcome into the podcast.
Thanks so much for having me. Always happy to be here.
Dave, I know you're a big baseball guy, and we're going to talk about the book here in a little bit, but let's start a little bit on the podcast about the Pittsburgh Pirates. It's been a crazy opening couple weeks for the Buccos on and off the field. They did get a big win this afternoon at PNC Park, a 2-1 13-inning thriller as they beat the St. Louis Cardinals to take 2 out of 3 this week against the Cardinals at PNC Park. They are now 5-8 on the young season, few games out of first place. They will head to Cincinnati this upcoming weekend to take on the Reds. But Dave, there's been a lot of drama off the field too. The Roberto Clemente logo in right field was replaced with an ad. The Pirates went back to that ad as early as today. They've went back to the logo, I should say, for Clemente in right field to try to make that situation right. And then the bricks outside PNC Park, in which I know you had one of those as well. Those have been removed and apparently at a dumpster site somewhere in Beaver County, awaiting someone to go pick them up. We'll have a little bit more information on that here in a little bit. But your thoughts on the Buccos season so far and all the craziness on and off the field?
Well, off the field, I'm thinking you just need to hire a PR department with people that understand baseball. Um, Look, I mean, it's a revenue generated business as any sport is. They do honor Clemente in various ways. There was an article by Mark Madden, a former classmate of mine at Duquesne, um, basically pointing out in the world of things people should be concerned with, this isn't one of them because they do a good job of honoring Roberto in that park. That being said, you got to understand what the Clemente uh, family. I mean, I was at opening day. I didn't even notice myself until the Clemente family made an issue of it. I consider that not a real big deal because if you look over, they have the number 21 on the wall. It's named the Roberto Clemente wall. I didn't have as much a problem with that. The bricks, on the other hand, I was walking to a Steeler game in November and noticed the sidewalk was ripped up. I assumed they were just going to put new bricks in. And again, I understand people walk on them, they get beaten up, it's expensive to keep replacing them. But it's almost as if they operate on well, we won't say anything and maybe people won't notice. People noticed. When I mean, there's 10,000 bricks there. I like seeing. I'm there with my co-author Bill Rainier, um, who I've done a couple projects with, and he was my roommate at Duquesne University, and um, my mother-in-law, who had passed away a couple years ago. I mean, that's a special thing for me to see that brick, remembering how much she loved that team, and again, I understand. Come up with a plan before you go there, announce it. This is a better way to honor. Steelers did it, and they had, as they pulled the bricks, they also had a wall of the names that they honored who had the bricks at Acrisure Stadium. So it's not as much the things they did as much as the pure stupidity of not understanding what the reaction would be. And this just seems they pulled the Negro League statues out a couple years ago, which were honoring some of the greatest players ever to don the fields, diamonds of Pittsburgh, and you replaced them with blow up bats, which to me was just an FU to those greats. You pulled the Kiner statue out to make more space for people to drink beer. Again, they people cried about that. They brought it back. Stupid thing for them to do. They pulled the numbers, the retired numbers a few years ago for advertising. What are you thinking? I mean, especially when you're putting a bad product on the field. People aren't going to forget,
Right.
you know, about this when they have to go and watch subpar baseball, of which you're in a fifth year of a rebuild, and you're looking like you're going to be a 60-win team.
Well, Dave, I think one of the biggest issues with the Pirates with this too is, Pittsburgh, as is a very rich traditional sports climate, right? We love our history, we love our teams, and when you look at the Pirates, there's really no recent history to get excited about. You had those 3 playoff years in the mid-teens of the 2000s here, and outside of that, you got to go all the way back to the early 90s. You got to go all the way back to 1979, the last time they were even in a World Series, let alone win one. So you have to feed off of the history in and around the Pittsburgh Pirates, and part of that is Clemente. He is the main. Him and Mazeroski are the two main Pirates throughout history. Stargell maybe in that conversation too. So to do that just doesn't look good. And then these bricks that were built in and around PNC Park now 25 years ago. I would probably argue that 50% of those names on there with families might not even be with us anymore. That these were
No,
purchased with names on them to remember Pirate fans that were with this team back during
yeah,
those winning years. Just not a good look for the organization right now.
no. It's as if they are just so I don't know if it's oblivious or arrogant to the point that they just don't care. And I look, from all accounts I hear, Bob Nutting's a good guy who does a lot in charity work. But if these are people in the organization making decisions, that falls on him to make them responsible to do the right thing.
Right.
Same thing. I don't blame him necessarily for the downfall of this team. Yes, he should fund it more, but small market teams survive on development of players, and from all accounts, he funds the development system. So a Ben Charrington and a Derek Shelton need to take more of a blame in this, and Bob Nutting too, obviously, because he's not funding it and he's allowing this to happen with no accounting.
Dave, one of the other, I think, big things in and around is you said it earlier here in the podcast too. Winning solves everything. If the team's winning, this may not be big topics. I think there's still going to be topics, but maybe not as big. And it's something that this season, when you have an off season and you have a generational pitcher like Paul Skeens, and you don't build around that generational talent that you have here for the next few years, pretty much do nothing to build this team up, and then they come out of the gates. They lose in Miami early on. Of course, they had that series against the Yankees at PNC Park this past weekend, in which they struggled at times. St. Louis, they get 2 out of 3 back this week, so there's a little bit glimmer of hope. It's still young in the season, 5-8, but all indications, at least so far, Dave, is this is going to be a long season once again for the Pirates.
Yeah, I mean, it's look at the lineup. It's a pop gun lineup. You're putting a guy who strikes out 30-40% of the time. Jack Sawinski is your leadoff hitter today. It's a pop gun offense, basically. And with the way the hitters in the system have regressed over the past year, I'm not sure there's a lot of hope there. And yes, you got a generational talent, and this is where a Bob Nutting needs to step up. You invest 35 to 40 million a year in a 14 or 15-year contract, like Guerrero just signed with Toronto, and you could make up that money and more in the course of a year, and fans getting excited about this team. That's the PR this team needs. I mean, today, if there was 1,000, I was there today. If there was 1,000 people in the building, I would have been surprised. The 50-50 was at $996 at game time.
Wow. And the attendance the last two nights were not that strong either, especially when you had Paul Skeens pitching last night as well. I can't remember a start to a season on and off the field for a Pirates team that was about as bad as it could have been these last couple of weeks, including Skeens, who pitches last night and probably had his worst outing of his young career so far, giving up 5 earned
Yeah.
runs in 6 innings to take the loss last night against the Cardinals. So that certainly did not make Pirate Nation feel any better. Dave, there is a little bit glimmer of a hope on the bricks. Our editor in chief, Ryan, here at oneBURGH, is in contact and is trying to purchase these bricks that are idle right now to get them in oneBURGH's possession so he can give them back to the people that have reached out through our website to say, hey, look, including yourself, Dave, that I have a brick. Can you find it
Yeah.
for me? So there is a little bit of glimmer of hope, but we'll ultimately see if the whether it's Brian with oneBURGH or the Pittsburgh Pirates, somebody makes this right.
Well, Brian has always been a good guy, so um, I do look forward to seeing several Pittsburgh toilets on Facebook every day, and I mean that's the right thing to do. The Pirates, hopefully, this forces them in a position to actually do something um, to make it right. Because again, you bought the bricks on the promise that they would be there. And as I said, I like seeing my name there. Wasn't as irritated about that as I was the fact I don't get to see my mother-in-law's brick there, and I don't get to remember all the times we spent there um, over the past 20 some years before she passed away a couple years ago. And she loved this team. She really did.
And that story right there is what we're hearing from a lot of families and a lot of people out there, Dave, right now about those bricks. So whether it's oneBURGH able to acquire these and get them back into at least some of the people's hands, or the Pittsburgh Pirates do something with it, we hope that there is a solution on the way for folks and families like yours and others. We are talking with Dave Finoli here on the TroupCast here on oneBURGH. Glad you could join us on oneBURGH Facebook. Maybe you're listening back on our Spotify channel or watching us on YouTube. It is the TroupCast for Wednesday, April 9th. We're with Dave Finoli, who is the author of Behind the Mic, his newest book that just came out not too long ago, Pittsburgh's Greatest Sports Broadcast Journalist. And Dave, I want to talk a little bit about the book and get your insight. I had a chance to read a little bit through it. Let's start right from the beginning, the intro to this book that you guys talk about at the beginning. And you guys talk about, and I say you guys because there's a few authors attached to this
Yeah.
too, and I'll let you talk about Tom Rooney and others here in a minute. But you guys talk about how this book starts and how it started for all of you listening to Pirates baseball on traditional AM radio back when the Pirates won games, right? The 60s and
Yeah.
70s, and listening to the legendary guys such as Prince and some of the others, Nellie King, I know you mentioned in this book as well, Jack Fleming with the Steelers, a lot of good old school names. So why don't we start there? What was the idea behind the book?
Well, idea behind the book. I mean, Tom came to me, Rooney, and we started talking about some of the great broadcasters that we listened to. He had the idea. What would you think about a book for that? And you know what? To me, they're as important as the athletes in our generation, especially where there were 30 games on TV max. So we spent our lives on the listening on the radio. I had a little round orange Panasonic radio, and my brother, my cousin, myself, and my father on a nice day would be sitting on the porch listening to Bob Prince tell us about the games. And it was not only how we fell in love with the game, but you know what? It bonded generations, and it did so in a way that I don't know happens anymore with the way it's set up. But these guys, they didn't just tell you what was going on; they painted a story, and they made you feel you can envision yourself there as you listen to them talking about these guys. And in fact, in the Bob Prince, that's how I start out my Bob Prince chapter is relating that story, because that's how I fell in love with Bob Prince. I started following the team in '69, and um, that he was the one that introduced me to the Pirates more than anything. And we got to talking about some of the greats we had seen, guys that people forget about. Joe Tucker, who was the Steeler announcer before Jack Fleming, and he announced Duquesne. He was one of the greats in Pittsburgh that gets forgotten. Dick Stockton, who is
Right.
um, the greatest, arguably the greatest NBA play-by-play man in history, broadcast more games than anybody. Started uh, or did he didn't get a start here? He got a start in Boston, but I mean he was in Pittsburgh for quite a few years at KDKA. Was a Steeler broadcaster for the preseason games, and really was here before he became a big name with the Red Sox. Um, I mean, radio broadcast started in Pittsburgh. Harold Arlen um, was an engineer with KDKA and broadcast the first, not only the first baseball game in the history of the sport on KDK, but broadcast the first college football game in West Virginia. Um, I mean, so these are things that we wanted to get out there. We wanted to create, in essence, our own broadcasting hall of fame, and that's basically what was the inspiration for the book.
Dave, the book is dedicated to Mike Lang. Of course, one of the best to ever do it. I always tell people that I've for 25 years I've broadcasted high school football and basketball. Currently with the Trib Live High School Sports Network, and through those years I've tried every sport to broadcast, including hockey. And I tell everybody all the time that the play-by-play for hockey, whether it's radio or TV, is one of the hardest things to call. I lasted about 2 minutes, and I said, guys, this isn't for me. It's too much. I'll stick with football and basketball. And it's not because I don't like hockey. It's just because how challenging it is. And
Sure.
nobody did it better than Mike Lang, and especially over the years to build up the type of reputation that he did with the Pittsburgh Penguins, the NHL, not only here in Pittsburgh, but nationwide. Talk a little bit about Mike Lang. This book's dedicated to him. We lost him here recently, and how great he was as one of the legendary hockey play-by-play guys.
Oh my God. I mean, sadly, the day I was about to send this to press, um, he passed away, and so we held it up so we could make some adjustments in the book and make sure we changed our dedication in his honor. This guy, he was a beast. I will defy anybody to tell me of a better hockey broadcaster in the history of the sport um, than Mike Lang. He started in the 70s when the team was bad, left for a year or so, but man, not he was the voice of the Penguins throughout 90% of their history, and he was so colorful. And not only could he keep, I agree with you. It's not only the hardest game to broadcast, I'm sure, but it's the hardest game to keep up with. If not for instant replay, you get lost sometimes. So the fact he was able to do it so fluently and entertain us, and he was old school. That's what they did. That's what Mike Lang did. That's what Myron Cope did. That's what Bob Prince did. They entertained you on top of telling the story, and nobody was better in hockey than Mike Lang. And to the point where the sayings he gave us. I mean, the stories on how he came up with those are as entertaining as him just pulling things out of the blue. And he, from all accounts, I dealt with him once. I was a buyer at Horns. He was selling a line of his T-shirts with his sayings on it, and just what a great guy! What a great guy! It was a just a fun meeting we had with him, and he just his kindness um, just stayed with me through the years, and everybody you hear the stories about him from who knew him well, it's the same thing. It's still tough. It was tough to hear it, even though I guess he had been ill, didn't want people really to know. But then you started hearing the stories about his last couple months, and it just it saddens you every time you hear a Penguin game and that voice isn't there anymore.
Well, Dave, not to keep talking on a down note of folks that we've lost in the Pittsburgh broadcast journalist world, but you guys also talk about Stan Savran, who we lost, a couple years ago, Tunch Ilkin and Craig Wolfley. We actually had Wolf here on the TroupCast twice last year, and we're very sad to hear about his passing. here earlier this spring, late winter. Those are three legendary, as well as you mentioned, Myron Cope and Jack Fleming and Prince and these others as well. But, anytime you talk about guys we're remembering that did this so well, and I know you guys talk about it in the book, Stan Savran, Tunch Ilkin, and Craig Wolfley, another three of the best to do it.
Oh, well, Stan, that was probably out of everybody here. That was probably the one that hit me the most when he had passed away. Stan called me up after I'd done my book, or sent me an email after I'd done my book, Classic Penguins, which was their top 50 games, and wanted me to come on the show. Well, to me that was the highlight of my writing career, because I grew up listening to this guy here just about every day. And I remember calling up my dad that day, "Hey, I'm going to be on the Stan Savran show." And dad just got the biggest kick out of that because he was a fan too. And, the man through the years, he always wanted me to send him an email when I had a new project. He always made time for me. He didn't have to do that. I mean, who was I compared to Stan Savran? And he always went out of his way to make sure he cut out time in his schedule so I could come on and promote a book. And you just never forget kindness like that when somebody goes out of their way. But beyond that, here was a guy who wasn't afraid to tell you what he thought, but he did so in an educated manner. And that was the difference between he and some of the other people you hear nationally on ESPN and such now, is they just want to say something just to get a hit and just to,
Yep, get those clicks. Just get
yeah,
the click.
clicks.
Yep.
Stan would always look at the other side. He'd give you his well thought out opinion. He didn't really care if you agreed with him or not, but he was going to make sure you understood why he thought that. He was knowledgeable, he was entertaining, and he was just a genuine gentleman throughout. Um, I never had the pleasure of meeting Tunch or Craig, but again, from all accounts, and what you see, what they did for the community. I mean, but here were two guys that I mean, they weren't your prototypical offensive linemen that people projected as stars. They busted their butt. They made themselves all pros. They made themselves good players, um, and they made themselves entertaining announcers. You don't always see that when the athletes, they can give you some knowledgeable takes, but you don't always get the entertainment aspect too. And that's why these two guys were included in the book. Is their radio show was always fun. It was light. They understood it was just a game. They understood this wasn't life or death, and they had fun with it. And they also would give you knowledgeable takes um, on what you were seeing. Bill Hillgrove said he would enjoy talking to them as offensive linemen, getting a breakdown of the game more than he would a quarterback, because they understood everything. They understood what the defensive line was coming up, and I mean, offensive line have a lot to deal with, and he just respected the fact of what they were able to give and entertain you at the same breath.
We're talking with Dave Finoli, author of his newest book, has several books out there. We can go through a bunch of them, Dave. But your newest one is Behind the Mic, Pittsburgh's Greatest Sports Broadcast Journalist. There's my copy right there. Next time I see Dave, I'll have to have him sign this for me for sure. Hopefully that'll be sooner rather than later, my friend.
You
Dave,
got it.
you talked about Billy Hillgrove, and there's another guy. I grew up with Jack Fleming at the tail end of his career, and then it's been Hillgrove ever since, up until our friend Rob King, who's been on the podcast a few times.
Sure.
A lot of shout outs to a lot of guys, including yourself. Rob King's been on, and we had Guy Junker on here too not too long ago, speaking of Stan and Guy. But
Yeah.
you have Cope and Hillgrove on the cover of the book. What made you choose those two for the cover of the book?
Well, Hillgrove, in a weird way, is still the most underrated great. I put him on my Mount Rushmore of Pittsburgh broadcasters. I mean, this guy has had a long and storied career. Um, I mean, while I love the Pirates, the dirty secret is the Pitt Panther football team has always been my favorite Pittsburgh sports team. Um, and Bill Hillgrove, in the mid 70s, when I was first getting into it, really fostered that love. And I mean, with him, you hear the joy in his voice for what he does every time it comes out. And here's a guy that um, has really seen it all. He's I mean, they won a national championship in 1976. He was on the
Right.
mic.
Yep.
Um, Super Bowls, he was there. I mean, you tell me a guy with a more storied resume, um, in broadcasting and local broadcasting. I understand, the national guys get to do these things, but you don't see that a lot on the local level. And this guy is, to me, he's one of my favorites, and just one of the underrated folks in history. And Myron was just Myron. I mean, you know, there's a guy that just brought to life everything. And what a brilliant write. If you've never read some of his old Sports Illustrated stuff, I have some of his books he wrote in the 60s. Do so. And they're, I mean, Sports Illustrated had celebrated many of his articles he did for him. He was a freelancer before he started his broadcasting career, and wrote on Muhammad Ali, wrote on Roberto Clemente, some classic things. Um, and I mean, here's a guy that didn't have a voice for broadcasting, but man, he was entertaining. And again, another personal one to me. When I was a young senior at Duquesne University, I was just starting to cover the basketball team, and I was going on my first uh, deadline article, because we came out once a week, and I had to get the thing done that night to get it into press for the next week. And Myron was sitting next to me. I was too nervous to say a word to him, because it's Myron Cope, and he turned to me, he said, well, what's the problem, son? And I told him, and he, again, didn't have to do it. Sat there for about 15 minutes, giving me hints on how to write certain things as the game was going on, so it's not as overbearing at the end. And just again, didn't have to do that. And you remember those things. And
Right.
they say when you meet your heroes, oftentimes you're disappointed. Not in this situation. Not with Myron. So to me, those two guys together were just, when I saw that picture, I knew it had to be on the cover.
One of the best. We keep talking about one of the best to ever do. We have so many here in Pittsburgh, but my goodness, what an iconic voice Myron Cope was. And you're right, what a great writer too, and the Sports Illustrated stuff. And of course, he hosted his own radio show on WTAE radio back then, as did Hillgrove. Just so many good legends that are in this book that you guys profile of former guys and current guys. I have to mention this real quick. Bob Orquist, a good friend of mine who does games with the Trib Live High School Sports Network, who's been covering high school sports along with Don Rebel and a bunch of others over the years. Bob is featured in this book as well. And you talk about him being on the high school broadcasting Mount Rushmore. And Bob certainly deserves to do that. I've never seen somebody prep as good as Bob Orquist does. So a special shout out to him. Hey, Dave, I want to end with this. We have about 2 or 3 more minutes left with you here on the podcast. The Mount Rushmore that you mentioned a little bit ago, you mentioned in the book too, you guys have Prince, Lang, Cope, and Hillgrove on that Mount Rushmore. Mine's going to be a little bit different, mainly because of my age, right? A little,
Sure,
little bit younger than you.
sure.
I'd have Cope, Hillgrove, Stan, and Mike Lang on mine. So I'm going to bounce Prince. Not that I don't disrespect Prince, all
No,
the respect in the world, but just for my generation, I'm going to put Stan in there
and trust
instead.
me, Stan was fifth. I mean, he was
Yeah.
right there.
But those are some big names that we just went through on the Pittsburgh Mount Rushmore of sports broadcast journalists. And you guys have a great list. I have a great list. I'm sure there's others out there too, and a lot of it's just based on your generation, what you grew up listening to. Dave, thanks for coming on. Where can people get the book?
They can get it on my website, which is 21-66books.com, which they'll get that, and they'll get over 50 other books that we carry on the website, and they can also pick it up on Amazon.com.
And any other books?
Well, we have a book that we also published in conjunction with the 2025 U.S. Open, where it's called Battling the Church Pews, which is a complete history of every major championship, USGA and PGA, that has been competed for in Pittsburgh. Um, that it's a beast of a historical uh, story on that, and some great stories. And what we're working on now is a book on the 1963 Pitt Panther football team called Uninvited, team that finished third in the nation, but ended up not getting a bowl bid and having a shot at competing for the national championship because President Kennedy was shot and they had to move their Penn State game. But it's a there's a lot more into the story, and that should be out in July in time for football season. And I promise you, it's a good look at the football program that has the backdrop of 1963, where violence was beginning to become prevalent in civil rights, and the Vietnam War was just starting. And it's a weird mix of how this all came together.
Awesome. We'll look forward to that, Dave. Thank you so much for coming on the program. We'll get you on back on the podcast here soon. I know you love to talk baseball and football and basketball and everything else. We certainly enjoyed it.
Oh, thank you so much. Enjoyed it myself.
All right, there he goes. Dave Finoli, author of Behind the Mic, Pittsburgh's greatest sports broadcast journalist. Make sure you pick up your copy today. If you're a Pittsburgh sports fan and you've heard some of the guys, and again, it's not just past, it's also present sports Pittsburgh journalists as well that they feature in that book. We do want to end with this and tell you one more time about oneBURGH and the TroupCast are partnering with the Ryan Shazier Fund for Spinal Rehabilitation. The run for the black and gold will take place on Friday evening, May 2nd at AccuShore Stadium in the PNC Champions Club. We will be on site at the event that night from AccuShore Stadium with the red carpet, player interviews, and more. Horse race and celebrity jockey auction will feature Ryan Shazier, Jerome Bettis, Mel Blunt, Pat Fryermuth, Arthur Moats, and many, many more. For tickets and more information, make sure you visit www.ryanshazierfund.org/run25 and join us next week for a special edition of the TroupCast with a press conference like podcast with three of the celebrity jockeys next week right here on oneBURGH. And that's going to do it for our podcast. For Dave Finoli, Ed Troup signing off for now. We'll see you next week right here on oneBURGH. Have a great night, everyone.